Welcome, everyone. Today we are continuing our dive into the history of Pan Africanism, a story of foresight, unity, and enduring dreams. Now, by the late 1960s and the 1970s, Pan Africanism began to take on a decidedly more revolutionary tone. The era of polite diplomacy and elite congresses were given way to grassroots struggles, Marxist critiques, and armed liberation movements across Africa and the diaspora. One of the most powerful voices in this radical phase was Walter Rodney, a brilliant Guyanese historian, activist, and author of the groundbreaking work uh, published in a book called How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. It was published in 1972. How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. Please look out for it and read it. So, in this text, Rodney laid bare how colonialism was not simply a historical injustice. It was a systemic theft that drained Africa's wealth and development potential to benefit Europe. Rodney made no bones. He did not couch his words. He laid it bare. You know, and he rejected the idea that Africa was behind only because of internal failings. He showed how deliberate economic, educational, and political policies by European powers kept African nations impoverished, fragmented, and dependent. This analysis, of course, made him immensely popular among African youths, students, and liberation movements, but a target for Western allied regimes. Rodney's activism extended far beyond the lecture hall. In Tanzania, he helped educate working class communities. In Jamaica, his popularity with the Black Power led to the government banning his re-entry there in 1968. And this sparked the Rodney riots. Unfortunately, in 1980, he was assassinated under suspicious political circumstances in Guyana. Rodney is a martyr to the cause of global black liberation. But Rodney was not alone in reshaping Pan Africanism into a revolutionary doctrine. He was part of a larger wave of thinkers and organizers who believed that true African liberation required structural change, not just independence ceremonies and flag raising. It has to go beyond that, you know. So, around the same time, Malcolm X was also calling for a global black consciousness that connected the struggles of African Americans with those of Africans and Afro Caribbeans. In his famous message to the grassroots speech, Malcolm X named colonialism and imperialism as common enemies. Before his assassination in 1965, he had begun building bridges with African leaders and speaking at the Organization of African Unity, OAU, as it was known at the time. Pan Africanism at that point was really quite militant, mass based, and ideologically bold. It was tied to liberation struggles in places like Angola that were still colonized, Mozambique, Guinea Bissau, and South Africa. Leaders like Amilcar Cabral, Samora Machel, and Thomas Sankara combined African nationalism with socialism and Pan-African ideals. Even the arts reflected this shift. Musicians like Fela Anikulapo Kuti used Afrobeat to critique African dictators and Western neocolonialism. Poets, playwrights, filmmakers all joined the Cultural Revolution, creating art that was as much protest as it was performance. So, in that revolutionary moment, Pan Africanism was not just a call for unity, but a weapon, a way to interrogate the economic and political structures that continued to oppress African people globally. That moment reminded the world that independence without justice is just an illusion, and that until African people everywhere were free, not just from colonialism, but from its lingering systems of exploitation, the work of Pan Africanism remains unfinished. So, Pan Africanism is not just a political and intellectual movement, it has always been a cultural force rooted in language, music, dress, ritual, and storytelling. For many people, their first encounter with Pan Africanism doesn't come from books or speeches, but through song, dance, literature, cinema, and visual arts that celebrate African identity and confront colonial legacies. I mean, imagine the hundreds of millions of people who danced and sang to Fela's Beast of No Nation. you know those were people dancing to a song entrenched in the philosophy of a pan-africanism without having to learn about it in books. So let's look more closely at music, um, and artists like Bob Marley, like Fela Anikulapo Kuti, turned Pan-African messages into something millions could feel. Marley's songs, such as Africa Unite, Redemption Song, drew from both his Rastafarian background and black liberation theology. Fela Anikulapo Kuti, with his creation of Afrobeat, directly challenged African dictatorships and Western neocolonial influence in songs like I said, Beast of No Nation and others. The Beast of No Nation was a succinct critique of the UN. Marvelous what these people did with their music. Pan African literature too has played a major role with writers like Chinua Achebe, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Wole Soyinka, Amata Aidu, Mariama Ba, Lauren Hansbury of a Raisin in the Sun fame were using fiction, drama, and essays to reclaim African narratives and affirm cultural pride. In visual and performance arts, major cultural festivals were central to the Pan African project. And one of the most important was the first World Festival of Negro Arts held in Dakar, Senegal, from the 1st of April to the 24th of April in 1966. This groundbreaking event was hosted by President Leopold Sedar Senghor, who, as I mentioned earlier, was a pan-Africanist. He was a key figure in the Negritude movement. It brought together that first festival of Negro World Art brought together more than 2,000 artists, musicians, writers, and scholars from across Africa, the Caribbean, Europe, North America, and Latin America. Now, notable participants at that festival included people like Langston Hughes, Josephine Baker, Duke Ellington, Aim Cheze, and of course, Wale Soyinka. The festival was the first global celebration of Black cultural achievement held on African soil. And it positioned Senegal to some extent and Africa more broadly as a vital center of global Black creativity and unity. So that first festival set the stage for another cultural milestone, Festac 77, which was even bigger and bolder, which took place in Nigeria. Festac deepened the cultural dimension of Pan-Africanism and fostered even greater diaspora engagement. Pan-African cinema um, also played a powerful role, and people like Usman Sembene, often called the father of Pan-African cinema, used film to explore themes of colonial trauma and social justice. His films were designed to be accessible. Often they were often screened in places that were accessible to the masses, like marketplaces, in order to foster public engagement. So it wasn't just he wanted to take those notions behind Pan-Africanism, to the people, to the marketplaces, to the beggars, to the lowly, economically lowly people, and all of that. So, culture has always been how people see themselves. And in the Pan African struggles, art has always been a form not just of entertainment, but of memory, identity, and revolution. Even in fashion and textile arts, the use of kente, adire, ashoke, bogo lamfini, that is the mud cloth, and Masai beadwork, and so on, became expressions of cultural pride and identity reclamation, signaling unity across regions and aesthetics. So, what ties all of this together is that Pan Africanism in the arts does not require permission. It does not require anybody sitting judge, giving out Oscars or Tonys or BAFTA and all of that. It bypasses politics and reaches directly into the soul. It reminds us who we are, where we come from, and what we can be. So, if politics is how we govern ourselves, culture is how we see ourselves, and Pan Africanism needs both. The political movement would never have endured without the music, the stories, the drums, and the dances that kept the flame alive in the hearts of the majority of the people. Thanks for watching. Please join me next time as we continue this journey. Remember, the Sankofa bird looks back, not to dwell in the past, but to bring the best of it forward. Let's carry it forward together.